right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Logical Nonsense Podcast. Today we have Liam Wilson rejoining us on the podcast. I haven't talked a whole lot of MLB, so I had to bring on one of my fellow MLB fans. Liam, how are you today?
Doing pretty good. Excited to look over some of the teams.
MLB, after All-Star break, that's when you know things get serious. Teams start making pushes. A lot of people may look at the first half, but it's truly the second half that always matters. If you can make it into the playoffs, because anything can happen in October, as we know. So let's start out with the AL West, as I know you're a Seattle Mariners fan, so I wanted to start here. Crazy division in terms of teams after the All-Star break. First, you have, the Rangers are 15-7 since the All-Star break. The Astros are 15-8 since the All-Star break, and the Mariners are 15-8 since the All-Star break. That does not include today. I pulled these stats yesterday, but we can start out with the Rangers. They picked up Scherzer. They picked up Scherzer,
Oh, yep. Mad
and
Max.
they've been kind of looking unstoppable. So, what are your thoughts on the Rangers? Do you think they'll end the year on top of the AL West?
I'm interested to see kind of how, right now, I don't think they're slowing down at all. Like all the other teams, they pick up some good leading teams. They pick up some
Mm-hmm.
good acquisitions at the deadline. Their offense, I think, is their best feature of the team. They just can rack up runs. I mean, when the Mariners played them last, I think maybe the only series this year or that I can think of off the top of my head so far, they got destroyed. Like the Rangers put up over 10 runs on them, I think, every game.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, I think they're definitely the favorites to win the division. The Astros, if I'm checking the standings right here,
They were
are
they were only two
not
and a
too
half
far
games
back.
back. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So they're right there, and that's why I kind of wanted to pose that question, because they're definitely sneaking up on them, and they've been as hot as them. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's really gonna come down to which team can slow down.
Yeah, exactly. I think putting the teams or when they play each other directly, that's going to be a huge series, however many
Momentum.
games they have
Yep.
left. Yeah, I wouldn't count the Astros out at any point just because of how much success they've had over the last few years. They've dominated. I think they've won the division every year since 2017, except for the shortened 2020 when the A's won it, I think. And
Yeah.
then the A's got destroyed by them in the playoffs that year. So,
Yep.
it's hard to count them out. I think Seattle is back, 7 games right now. It's kind of looking like maybe a bit more depending on how many they played. So I think the Mariners' chances are a little bit cooked, but excited about the wild card potential with them.
Yeah. So they're only 2.5 games back from the wild card, making the wild card right now. Like you said, probably a little unreasonable to assume that they can gain 7 games on either one of those teams. I mean, obviously they're not as far back from the Astros, but again, I just don't see them winning the division. But I definitely could see them making the wild card. Their schedule is very doable to make the wild card too, which is a good sign for them. And they're also, I feel like they have good pitching for the most part. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, the Mariners, I think their real strength over this kind of rebuild or success over the past few years has been developing a lot of homegrown pitching talent. They signed Robbie Ray in 2022, and he didn't have the best season, not like a Cy Young caliber season like his previous one, but he was still a good pitcher for them and not a bad starting pitcher in my overall opinion. But he's been out basically all year at this point. But I mean, people just keep coming up. Like Castillo is really good, even though he was a trade acquisition.
Yep.
Logan Gilbert just had a career high in strikeouts yesterday. George Kirby has the best strike to walk ratio in the league.
Hmm.
It's around 8 or 9, I think, right now, which is one of the, if he continues this pace, I think would be a top 10 strikeout to walk ratio. Because the offense is pretty mediocre. They're able to kind of come through when they need
Yeah.
to, but right now things have been working out. They've been playing just good enough, and they've had some exciting games, especially in the Angel sweep they had recently, which helps propel the Mariners up the standings and also bury not only a divisional opponent, a wild card opponent. So
Yeah, and I think the cool thing about them is they have a lot of depth in their pitching, which is huge, especially as you get later in the season. Guys get tired, pitchers get tired, you need to be able to plug in guys that you can trust. And I feel like they have pretty decent depth across not only their starting pitching, but also some of their relief pitchers as well have been able to come in and get the job done. I know they just traded Seawald, right?
yep, Paul Sewald to the Diamondbacks.
What were your thoughts on that? Do you like it or no?
Uh, it's an interesting one. Paul Sewald, if I'm correct here, I think he's going to be a free agent in the next season. He is a great player. He's an awesome closer, and it always sucks to lose when you have such an electric or lose such an electric bullpen arm. But I think the Mariners can kind of enjoy a bit of a surplus of pitching talent right now because along with our good starters, there's a lot of talent in the bullpen. Recently, since Seawald has departed, they've been using Matt Brash to close out a couple games, and Brash so far has been a little, he'll get in a bit of a jam. It's a little terrifying, but he's gotten out of it every time so far. Um, and I think it was a good move just because of how many pitchers they have, kind of exceptional pitchers they have on the roster, that they could afford to lose Seawald for the rest of this season. And who knows, maybe if they still have a good relation and they want him back, they could even try to re-sign him in free agency.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, it was an interesting move, and I think some Mariners fans were unhappy about it. But like you said, I think it makes sense. So we'll see. We'll see how the Mariners can finish up. Do you think they'll be able to make the wild card?
If they can keep this momentum going, kind of like how they did last year, because that was the same thing without like a 14 or 15 game winning streak. The Mariners got really hot in the end of June, going all the way through July. And I think the Mariners actually had a better July record this year than last year. And that was without that winning streak carrying into it. And so I think if they keep it up, uh, they have a really good shot because they've been hovering around 500 ball all season. And all it really needed to take was some consistency and putting some wins together.
Yeah. Yep. Um, so let's move on because we got some divisions to go on. AL East, interesting division. Start of the year we had Tampa Bay Rays who were super hot. They have really cooled down. Since the All-Star break, 11-11. Right before the All-Star break, they went on a 7-game losing streak, and they're actually yesterday they were 2 games back from the Orioles. I think they might have gone to a game back, but I'll double check again. But anyhow, no, they're 2.5 games back still. So they had a hot start and they've kind of really pressed break. But while they pressed break, the Orioles really heated up. They're the top of the AL East right now. They've been 16-8 since the All-Star break. Right before the All-Star break, they were doing well as well. And their closer has been absolutely insane and needs to get talked about more. Felix Bautista, incredible season. Already leading the league or leading at least the AL. 30 saves, 0.85 ERA. He's given up 5 earned runs all year, 102 strikeouts, and 6 wins. And he's only making 700K.
I actually didn't
Absolute dime.
I didn't even
Diamond in
realize
the
that
rough
he
right there.
had a less than 1 ERA. That's pretty crazy.
In the entire month of July, he didn't give up a run.
Yeah, that's insane. I remember last season I was following a Instagram fan page for the Orioles because I thought it was interesting keeping up with their rebuild. And I can't remember. They had a good closer last year too. God, I'm blanking on his name right now, but they traded him at the deadline. Even though they were kind of in contention for a wild card spot last year, they won on a big win streak like the Mariners and that. They just kind of lost a bit of steam at the end. They uh, a lot of people were upset with trading kind of that piece, for the future because
Yeah.
they wanted them to try and make the playoffs then. But I mean, it worked out. They
Yeah.
got an even better. Oh, it was Jorge Lopez was his name.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, a Twins player.
yeah, yeah, traded him to the
Which they just
Twins.
traded. But yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, plug that in. The AL East has been an interesting division. I feel like every time I like check the standings, it's a completely different order. People, Red Sox and Yankees fans they're whining all the time about their teams, and sure, they're not as good as maybe they'd hoped, but I think every team is over 500 now, or at
They
least,
are, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Boston, I think, no, Yankees, I think are the worst, and maybe tied with Boston, yeah, and they're both 59 and 55 right now.
Yeah.
And it just feels like they're kind of flipping around. And I think the biggest thing, though, is that I didn't expect the Orioles to win their division this year. I would have probably expected the Rays or maybe even the Blue Jays. I think the Yankees, ever since they were on a blistering pace last season, have really slumped. Uh, the Blue Jays are pretty consistently good in the regular season, and the Rays, I think, were just decimated by injuries last year, and they still were able to make the wild card. But the Orioles are really put it all together, and it's cool to see for that fan base to actually have something to really cheer for.
Yeah, I think the Orioles in particular, what's cool about them is how young they are. They have so much young talent on top of having a top prospect in Jackson Holiday coming up too.
Yeah.
I mean, it just keeps getting better for them. Adley Rutschman, I saw a stat the other day, and it's like that basically their record has flipped since he's become their catcher. He's doing some incredible things at that catcher position that we haven't seen in a while. I mean, I'm not gonna say that we've had bad catchers, but we haven't had like a very offensively dominant catcher. I feel like I would say sometime. I mean, the last one I can think of really is Joe Mauer.
Yep. Was a Buster Posey was a catcher, right?
Yeah, but you could put Buster Posey in there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I'm saying. Like I would say early 2010s through like 2015 maybe
Yeah.
is the last time we've seen like a offensively dominant catcher who can also match it with his defense too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's cool to see. And I mean he's got long career ahead of him, and I hope they do well just because I feel like the Orioles haven't had a ton of success in their organization. Um, but the Rays, we'll see if they can turn it around. I thought they were a fun team to watch in the first half of the season, and obviously things have gone kind of downhill for them. Not like I mean they're still second in their division, and they're 69 and 47. Like they have a good record. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
not bad, and they're gonna probably make the wild card as long as they really don't like as long as shit really doesn't hit the fan. But it'd be cool to see those two teams because I feel like at the beginning of the year not many people would have predicted that.
Mm-hmm.
Um but looking at the other three teams, you got the Blue Jays, the Yankees, and the Red Sox. I feel like any one of those three teams are in reach. The Red Sox and the Yankees are 5 games back from the Blue Jays, which means they're 5 games back from the wild card. Do you think they could beat Seattle or the Blue Jays for that wild card spot?
I think there's definitely a chance. I'd probably believe in I haven't followed the Red Sox super closely this season, But to me, it just kind of seems like the Red Sox are a bit less of a not a dumpster fire is way too strong of a word because the Yankees are still doing all right, but the Yankees have just had a lot of like weird stuff happen to them this season. Like I think Domingo Yerman, he's like off the
Yeah,
roster now because he had some substance abuse thing.
after he
Luis
threw a perfect game
Severino
too.
is
Yeah,
yeah, right after that. Severino is uh terrible this season for some reason. Um Aaron Judge, I think recently came back. Uh what's the other guy's name? Giancarlo Stanton. He gets injured quite a bit. They just seem like they've had a lot of weird stuff happening to them this
yeah,
season, and it might just be too much to overcome. I feel like the Red Sox have just been kind of prodding along a bit more. And then
yeah.
also I just saw Trevor Story's coming back. I didn't realize he had been out all season, but that's kind of a boost to them as well. So
Definitely. The other thing with the Yankees, this is kind of more of a joke, but I mean, the coach is frustrated too. He's been kicked out like 5 or 6 times this year. I don't know if you saw him get
yeah,
ejected the other day, but it's pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see if they can make a run. I'm not really a fan of either team, to be honest. So I'm not
me
like
too.
rooting for them to make a run. I think I'd rather see the Mariners make a run than those two teams, but I would prefer that if of those two teams, I would prefer the Red Sox rather than the Yankees, just because I just cannot stand the Yankees, man. And I think
Yeah,
it's funny
no,
when yeah, I think it's funny when a team spends a lot of money and they still can't make the playoffs. So
anything is better than Yankees success. I'm like, unless you're a New York fan or you're a Yankees fan, you should hate the Yankees.
yes, exactly. All right. Anything else for the AL East?
No, that about wraps it up for me, I think.
Okay. We'll move to the AL Central, which many have called the dumpster fire of the league right now. I was so excited because going into today, I was like, even before like 6 p.m. today, I was about to hype up my Twins a little bit. You know, they were 15-9 since the All-Star break, which competes with just about anyone I have said that has had a good All-Star break. They've had some good winning streaks. They beat some good teams. They swept the Diamondbacks. They've won some good series. But then the last 2 days, we have lost to the Tigers, not just by a couple runs, but by like a lot of runs. So I don't know what to tell you about my Twins. I really don't. Because, you know, at the All Star break, a lot of people thought, the Twins are at the top of the AL Central. Maybe they'll make some moves. Or trade deadline, not All Star break. Trade deadline. Maybe they'll make some moves to make themselves a little better. The only move we made was getting rid of Jorge Lopez.
Yeah, and that's just selling.
But then we go on this run. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you about this team, man. I'm so frustrated with them. There's some days we look great, and there's other days we look like we should be playing alongside the Oakland A's because we're that bad. I don't
Yeah.
understand this team. We have good pitching, but our offense is the most inconsistent thing in the league.
Yep, I feel you there. It sounds pretty similar to a lot of like how the Mariners season has gone up to this point where it's just like, pitching's doing its job, but players just can't hit for anything. Or it's
Yeah,
just solo home runs and we can't get guys on base or we can't get hits when people are on base since you're stranding runners all the time and it can be a frustrating experience to watch.
definitely. No, it's been like frustrating is the perfect word for it. But I would say the only other team I see really that could take this division is the Cleveland Guardians, who are 4.5 games back from the Twins. It's very doable, especially with the Twins. We'll see. They actually made a ton of moves at the deadline, and so it would be interesting if they didn't make it, I think, but they've actually haven't had the greatest turn since the All-Star break. As a matter of fact, they have gone 10-15 since the All-Star break. So it really hasn't worked out for them, their moves, but I guess we'll see. What are your thoughts on the AL Central run?
I was honestly kind of surprised to see. I was under, I don't know why exactly, but I was under the impression that Cleveland and the Twins were pretty close to like the top of the division, maybe like, one or two games separated. So I was surprised to see that the Guardians are 5 games under 500 right now, because I feel like Cleveland, especially the past few years when the Central has been pretty weak, it just seems like Cleveland is like the team that's just sort of the best at getting it together at the end,
Yeah,
and winning the division kind of, not that they're terrible, because they did what they won the series against the Rays last year in the playoffs, and the
yeah,
Rays, couldn't score a run, right? I think. Um and they actually played the Yankees decently well too in the divisional round. So they're not like a terrible organization, but they just weirdly seem like they have a knack for at the end of the season figuring it out enough to like win the
yeah,
division. But I think the Twins, for as inconsistent as they can be, they have a decent lead on the division now. I mean, 5 games it could evaporate as what, month and a half or more than a month and a half left in the season, but I'd probably pick the Twins right now. But we'll see. It always seems like it's kind of a battle between those two, because that was how it went last year too, right? That the Twins were up top for a while and
yeah.
then things
Well,
just
the
kind of fell
Twins
apart.
Twins definitely fell apart because by the end of the season they ended up actually the third, like in third in the division after
Hmm.
being in first for like a majority of the year. And then Cleveland and Detroit both went in front of them, I believe. So it was interesting. I can't remember if it was it was either Detroit or Chicago, but
Hmm.
no, I think the only thing Cleveland has going for them is that they have the next heavyweight champion of the world, Jose Ramirez. Man, man, oh man, was that a knockout, boy!
I'm
Get this man some
impressed.
gloves.
Like looking back on the footage, Tim Anderson gets a couple punches in, but just Ramirez manages to hit him like right on kind of the bottom of the chin, and that just this like rings his bell there.
The
He was not
thing
good after
the
that.
thing that's crazy about it is we've seen so many fights across, I mean, many sports, but very rarely do you see that crisp and clean of a punch on the chin to where it
Hmm.
knocks somebody out instantly like that. Like it was solid, man, and it could have been luck, like who knows, but I mean, he just bop, you know? I don't know. It was funny. At least I thought it was funny. I found it even more funny that Tim Anderson got suspended more games than Jose Ramirez.
So he
I
got
was like,
knocked on his ass and
hey,
suspended.
hey, buddy, I know you already got knocked out, but you're also going to be suspended more games than the guy who knocked you out.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's probably the best baseball fight since Odor knocked Bautista's glasses off that one
yeah,
time. That was a good punch too.
yep. But yeah, AL Central, I think it's the division where whoever wins, that's it. You're not getting a wild card from them. I don't think
Hmm.
there's a wild card race. It's if you can take the division, you're going to playoffs. But that's really it. Moving on into the NL, we have the same format: West, East, Central. So starting in the NL West, what I think a lot of people, especially at the beginning of the year, thought was going to be, I would say, what a lot of people thought was going to be in competition for one of the tougher divisions, which I mean it is, but not really. Too, Dodgers are in a pretty solid lead. They're 5 games ahead of San Francisco, and then 5 games back behind them are the Diamondbacks. Biggest story in the NL West: the Dodgers have come out hot, but the Diamondbacks have been absolutely awful. 5-17 since the break. They were at one point, I believe, top of this division.
I'm actually amazed. I knew they were bad. I didn't realize that they had only 5 wins since the All-Star break. Yeah, I was thinking about that today. The last time I was on here, I think I can't remember who I predicted for the AL, maybe something like Baltimore, which that was, you know, how they're
Good
looking
take
right
on
now, not
that.
too
Yeah.
bad. But I was also like, oh yeah, sleeper pick the Diamondbacks, and well, I still, hope that they do something. I'm just amazed with how hard they've fallen off. It's like I think it's just that the entire team is slumping at the same time. When the Mariners were playing them in Arizona, uh, maybe a week or two ago, uh, I was watching the end of one of the games, and they had a stat because there was some discussion about them trading for Paul Sewald potentially, which ended up happening, and they had the worst like team ERA out of at least the bullpen and I think even the starters since like the All-Star break. They're just pitching has been terrible. Paul Sewald hasn't really helped them too much. I saw he blew a save already. And then um, one thing though I've noticed too, their pitcher Zach Gallen, right?
Yeah.
Who they were talking about a lot at the beginning of the season. Um, I have not heard anything about him
No, it's
for a while now.
yeah. No, it's been interesting. I haven't kept a whole lot of tabs on the Diamondbacks, but when a pitcher is doing bad when at one point they're in consideration for like top 10 pitchers in the league, and then they're no longer in that conversation anymore. Like you don't see them on any list anymore. And it's like,
Hmm.
it's kind of like the same thing that happened with Sonny Gray. Sonny Gray, which I know I keep going back to my Twins. I don't mean to, but this is just an example. Like Sonny Gray at the beginning of the year was like in every top 10 pitcher, like top 5 even sometimes. Now
Hmm.
you don't even see him in the top 10. So I think he's definitely fallen off in similar ways that Sonny Gray has fallen off. And I think, an underrated feature, and maybe it's not underrated, you gotta have endurance through the season. It's
Hmm.
Baseball is tough that way. What makes a pitcher great is if they can be great for the entire season. Of course, you're gonna have your down games. You're not gonna be perfect every game. But if you can be consistent throughout the season and you know what to expect, that makes you a good pitcher. And I just don't know if we're seeing that out of Zach Gallen right now.
Hmm.
Um, and that's not to say like I haven't again kept tabs on him, so he could be doing fine, just hasn't been like great. But yeah. What about Dodgers? Do you see them doing things deep into the playoffs?
The Dodgers are kind of like at this point for me, I always expect them to make the playoffs, and whether or not they actually do something in the playoffs is kind of up in the air. It's until they have a season like, the sort of the Padres, more so like the Mets are having, where everything kind of blows up despite how much money they spend on the team. I'm going to always expect them to make the playoffs. I'm honestly going to always expect them to win the division, uh, essentially. Even though the Giants won it a couple years back, it's been really all Dodgers for about a decade now or so. Yeah, when they go to the playoffs, though, you never know what you're going to get, kind of. Like they made 3 World Series, they won one, which is awesome. Not going to take that, not going to treat that lightly. But it just seems like there's so many years where it's like, wow, this is like the best Dodgers squad. Like out of all this time of stacked Dodger teams, this one's like the actual best. And then they just, lose in the first round or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, was it? I don't know if it was last year. I don't know if it was 2021 or even last year, but like I remember they were on like an insane pace. Like I think it was post All-Star break at like the end of August. They had like won an insane amount of games. And Yeah, and then they lose to the Padres. They lose to little bro in the playoffs. So, we'll see. It always just kind of amazes me how, like, I don't know, it goes to show how much of a team sport it is when you have guys like Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman who are, MVP caliber players like
Yeah,
essentially every day, and they just, it can be so up in the air when it gets to elimination.
definitely. That's a great way to explain them. Do you think the Giants, I know you already said like you expect them to win the division, but do you think that there's any chance that the Giants can take this division?
I think being 5 games back, they're still within shooting distance. I didn't realize that the Giants were actually as close as they were, but the I don't know. It's just kind of it's the Dodgers always seem like they're such a well-oiled machine in the regular season. Uh, I think I'm gonna go with Dodgers as a lock for the division at this point.
Okay. Okay. Um, whoa. Um, yeah, I think that's reasonable. We will move on to the NL East. Are the Braves the best team in baseball?
Let's look at them here. I think just with the amount of talent they have on the team, you kind of can't make an argument against it. Acuna having his MVP season. I just saw earlier today that Matt Olson is the first to 100 RBI. Um, and I've heard that I've been kind of keeping up with him a little bit with how many homers he's been hitting. Um, I don't know everybody on the Braves by name, but I know that they have a lot of just really solid and great players that they've somehow locked into like really team kind of friendly contracts. Like I don't know how they kept getting away from it or getting away with it, but it kept seeming like, they'd get these guys where it's like, I don't know, say like a 7 year, $80 million deal. And like, that's a lot of money, but it's like, it when it comes to pro sports, it's like that's only like 11 million a year or something like that, really, really not too bad with how much money some of these teams are willing to spend. So yeah, it really seems like the NL is just the Braves to lose at this point. I think they should definitely be the heavy favorites going into the end here.
Yeah, the crazy part about them, um, well, one, they have the best record in baseball, and the second best team in their division right now is the Phillies, and the Phillies are 10.5 games back, and they're at like the record is 63-52.
Hmm.
So they're not a bad team like at all. Like the Phillies are definitely a very good team actually, and they're still 10 games back. So that just kind of shows you their dominance this season. They are just well-rounded across the board. Spencer Strider has been insane for them. Um, and I mean, we talked about Acuna's season in our last podcast. He's been amazing. Like you said, I mean, they have guys all across the board. So definitely could see them. But sometimes, in baseball, being the best team isn't always the best thing. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of pressure that comes with that, and we'll see if they can perform. I think what's possibly different about that team, which I kind of talked about, is they have a lot of guys with experience, especially in the postseason, and so that helps. So, but the Phillies had a no hitter today. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh yeah. Was
Michael
it
Lorenzen.
Yep, Lorenzen. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That was his debut for them too.
Yep. So I believe he came from the Tigers, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
Um, so it's pretty cool for him and the Phillies. On our last podcast, a perfect game had just happened. Now a no hitter just happens. I think we should have a podcast every month, so some sort of pitching uh abnormality will happen every time.
Yeah, yeah, it's a sign.
The other team to watch for in this division is the Miami Marlins, they're 2.5 games back from the wild card, but they've been 6-17 since the All-Star break.
So the Marlins have been pretty disappointing recently. I didn't realize that they were about just as bad as the Diamondbacks in terms of a 6-17 record there, which has been sad to see. I've been enjoying seeing some of these more downtrodden franchises getting their getting their spotlight this season in terms of doing well. Uh, I don't really know exactly what their issues are. I haven't been following them close enough to really see, but I hope they can pull it together. You said they were in the last wild card spot, right?
They were 2.5 games back from the wild card spot. Um,
Okay.
right now, I believe. Let me check who they're chasing. They are chasing the Chicago Cubs, whose team I want to talk about next, but or they're actually not 2.5 games back from the wild card. They are just a game back, it looks like.
Yep, that's what I'm seeing too.
Yep, just a game back. So very, very doable.
Still within striking distance. I'd like to see them make the playoffs, but I also wouldn't be against seeing a team like the Cubs make it. So we'll see. There are a lot of interesting storylines I feel like left with that last wild card spot in NL. Because looking here right now, you got the Cubs, you got Miami. Cincinnati's actually had a pretty good year so far, and Arizona's still sitting at 500, but they're still within range of getting back, especially if they went on a hot streak.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we don't have to talk about them since we're talking about playoff rushes, but I mean, it is pretty funny what the Mets, how much money they have spent in this division. Since we're talking about this division, it's funny that they spent so much money and have kind of just sold at this point. I mean, what's their record this year? They're 51-62, which is actually not as far back from the wild card as you'd think, but um, they just kind of been bad. Bad. They just have been bad, period.
Yeah. One thing I kind of respect them doing though is that they sort of just saw the writing was on the wall. They're like, all right, just we just signed Verlander and whatever, trade him and get some future prospects. Who
Let's
cares? We're the
let's trade him
Mets.
to
We
the
can
team
spend
we
money.
just signed him.
Yeah.
No, that'll be I don't know, something interesting with the NL East, especially because I feel like that division gets talked about so much because you have the Braves, you have the Phillies, and the Mets. And then I feel like weirdly the Nationals gets talked about quite a bit just because they've had some really good teams. Not lately, but like just in general they've had some good teams. So
Yeah, I think out of like all the last place teams I can think of, I hear about the Nationals the most.
yeah,
Well,
no,
aside from maybe the
exactly.
AL East, but that's kind
Yeah.
of a different.
Different breed of a division. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um yeah, interesting division. So our last division we'll talk about NL Central. It's pretty much the tightest race for the top that we've seen out of any of the divisions we've talked about. You kind of have three teams all contending. You have the Cubs, the Reds, and the Brewers. Cubs are the hottest coming out of the break. 17-8. I think the biggest question is can they maintain it? The Reds kind of actually gone downhill. They're 10-15. And then the Brewers are 500 since the break. So we'll see who's going to take the division. Brewers are on top of the division right now. So yeah, thoughts on this one?
I think the I think probably the most realistic choice is that the Brewers are going to win it. They've seemed to be the most consistent throughout the season, staying near the top or at the top. There's been a lot of, well, actually not too much switch, but the Pirates were really good at the beginning of the season. I think this division's been a lot more interesting than people would have predicted at
Anticipated.
the beginning of the season. Yeah, I think it was a lot of the Cardinals are just going to win it again, and they're the worst. They're the worst in the division right now.
Yep.
The
Which is
Pirates
weird to
cooled
say.
off. Yeah, especially when you got, Arenado and Goldschmidt still.
Yep.
Um, the Reds had that kind of crazy streak, and then when they called up De La
Yeah.
Cruz, that was kind of a, what's the right
Momentum.
word? Yeah, momentum, building there. I'm just impressed with how insane the Cubs have been, because how I felt about the Cubs this season has been kind of surmised in one play where our boy Matt was watching a game one time or keeping tabs in it, and he's like, "Oh man, I can't remember who it was, but he's perfect, to the eighth inning. Like, let's tune
Yeah,
in
it
and,
was
and watch."
wasn't it Smiley?
Yeah, yeah, Drew Smiley. And then we tune in, and immediately it's a ground ball or like a little blooper. And then the catcher essentially tackles Smiley and
Yeah.
breaks up the perfect game. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, okay, yeah, that's just Cubs baseball. But it's been cool to see. I've really enjoyed the redemption arc of Bellinger too.
Yeah.
That's been really neat to see. And so I don't know. We'll see if they can keep it up. But I think the safest choice would be Milwaukee right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like, they have a decent roster too, the Cubs. I mean, they picked up Dansby Swanson in the off season. They picked up or how long has Candelario been on their team?
I'm not too sure. I haven't known
I
the Cubs
honestly like I'm
roster a
just now
ton.
looking at the roster and I didn't realize like some of the names they had on their team, like Nico Horner, Patrick Wisdom, Giant Heimer Condelario, and then Dansby Swanson I knew of course. But I mean Ian Happ and Bellinger are also pretty good too. Like you said, Bellinger has had a good season. So I think it'd be fun and interesting to see the Cubs not only make the playoffs but also take the division.
Hmm.
But I just don't see it happening. I definitely think they're still in contention for wild card, of course. Um, it'll be interesting to see who takes that wild card because right now the Cubs are in it, but then Miami and Cincy are right at their heels, and not too far back is Arizona and San Diego, which Padres aren't really a team we talked about, but they technically still are in contention for that wild card.
Yeah. Yeah, the Padres are kind of, I don't know the exact story of their season. It just kind of seems like it's been underperforming, especially with how much star power they have. Because like just off the top of my
Definitely.
head, Yu Darvish, Blake Snell, Manny Machado, who was Xander Bogarts? Was
Yeah.
he the red? Yeah, Xander Bogarts, Juan Soto. It's just there's Fernando Tatis too.
Mhm.
They just have a lot of big name players, but it's just doesn't seem to work out this season.
Yeah, no, they've definitely opened up their paycheck book and it just hasn't worked out for them. But like I said, they're technically still in contention. So I mean we'll see. But I'd much rather see a team like the Cubs or I mean any of those teams that are right there, like the Cubs, Miami, Cincy. I'd rather see them. I think they're all much more fun teams that we haven't seen have as much success, at least in the last couple years. As
The Padres have been going. Yeah,
yeah,
I agree.
um, so that is kind of our playoff push for the MLB. Wanted to ask you a few other questions. Um, who do you think should get the Cy Young Award? Um, Garrett Cole has been thrown out a lot. Spencer Strider has been thrown out a lot. Um, I think possibly Shane McClanahan.
Hmm.
Um, so
Oh well, so I know that a lot of people have problems with the ESPN Cy Young predictor, but looking at it right now, they have Felix Bautista as the leader in the AL, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
I don't.
When's the last time we had a closer or relief pitcher win a Cy Young award? I'm gonna look that up.
All I could think of is maybe Mariano Rivera, but who knows? I mean, there was a lot of stacked pitching in his era, so I would be surprised if, but that was the Braves trio with Maddox and that was Pedro Martinez era. Roger Clemens still too. Like there were a lot of crazy pitchers in the 90s, but that's the only guy who would come to mind. That's crazy though. They have him
The
the
last time somebody had won a Cy Young as a relief pitcher was 2003, and his name was
2003.
Eric Gagne.
Interesting. I'm surprised I've never heard of him actually.
It looks like there's only been like two or three. There's four.
It hmm,
Yeah. Or wait.
it looks like that the ESPN predictor really enjoys closers because Bautista's leading in the AL, and then Alexis Diaz, who's the closer for Cincinnati, uh, is third in the NL. And I'm like, that doesn't seem right.
Yeah, we were talking about Gallen. He's seventh in the NL. So I mean, according to this predictor, it's not as far back. The ones that have been talked about the most are Eovaldi and Garrett Cole.
hmm
So we'll see. Yeah, and it's funny too because they have I don't know how you say his name, Clase, or is
Oh
it?
yeah, Emmanuel, yeah, Class A Clace. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, he's also a closer. So interesting. Um, yeah. Who do you think wins MVP in both divisions?
Um, MVP and AL essentially wrapped up with Shohei. I mean, as annoying as it is when the Mariners play him and then he just pimps a home run, he's insanely talented. 40, leading the league in home runs while being an exceptional pitcher too is crazy. So I think he's got that wrapped up by now. Um, honestly, at the beginning of the season, I think it was really like Acuna had it wrapped up too in the NL. But a little bit of a dark horse, I think, for MVP, honestly, could be Freddie Freeman. Just
Okay.
because they've had similar home run numbers, but I think where kind of each of them, I can't remember the exact stats, but they had a pretty close OPS, like I think over 1,000 right now. Acuna's got the stolen base numbers, but Freddie Freeman has hit like 40 doubles this season, like an
Yeah.
insane amount of doubles all the time. So he gets a lot of extra base hits. I think he's hitting around 313 or so last time I checked. So they're both, hitting for average, great OPS, similar home run totals, than they have their kind of each outstanding stats that go with them. So I think it's a bit closer of a race than people would think. But if it comes down to it and they have those kind of similar stats at the end of the year, um, I think they would probably give it to Acuna if the Braves end up getting the top record. Because that usually goes with the narrative of MVP is that you're on the best team in your conference or the league. So
Yeah. Definitely. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and my last question today for you. What have been what has been your thoughts on the podcast? I know you've listened to some episodes, probably not everyone, but thoughts on the pod.
I've been enjoying it so far. I actually listened to 3 episodes essentially. Um, while I was at work today, I was listening to the Madden rankings episode. I listened to the what is it? The NFL over under episode, and then I also listened to a bit of our first one just to remember what we were going over. And I like that just kind of casual. Obviously I know you and I know the guest stars, so always cool to hear. It's like being back at the house, just talking sports again. But reasonable takes, nothing crazy. I think I don't watch them a ton, but you get bombarded with the clips of hot take artists on ESPN and whatever radio shows all the time. So it's nice to actually just have casual, realistic sports discussion. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, definitely. Well, I appreciate you coming on. It's been fun, just like last time. I'll definitely have to reach out again, especially after some of those playoff games in October. Just kind of analyze those games. I think that'd be fun to maybe have both you and Dodge on here. I think he's always a fun player to kind of stir up some interesting moments and interesting conversations. So,
yeah, sounds great.
all right, thanks, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
Moving on into our music section, I'm just kind of basically going to go over what's expected to release this weekend. A Love Letter for You 5, Trippy Red, for All the Dogs by Drake. It's possible. We'll see. I have my doubts. But then the following week, we possibly have ASAP Rocky with Don't Be Dumb, Joyner Lucas with Not Now, I'm Busy, and then Rocket Power by Quavo. Um, Also expected West Side Gun in the future. Today, September 15th, is Kid Cudi's new album that's supposed to drop. He was on a video saying this is one of his most, basically, it sounds like one of his most proud of projects. Most, he says, touching, I guess. Moving is the right word for it. So we'll see what he can make. Kid Cudi is, I wouldn't say up and down in his career, but he's definitely had he doesn't have a flawless catalog in my opinion, and so we'll see how he will do on this next album. In terms of the rest of the music portion, I'm gonna wait and see what comes out on Friday. Probably do an album review of whatever comes out. On days like today, I would like to start reviewing some old albums that I haven't listened to yet for the first time. There's plenty of old albums, old hip hop albums that I haven't listened to. Would love to review them as my perspective now, just because I think reviewing albums is fun. Analyzing music, analyzing lyrics, kind of because everybody has a different experience with music. So that's something to look forward to. So we're going to kick right into our fashion segment. As always, on Wednesday, I will go over what's going to be releasing. Coming up on Friday, we have kind of a big weekend this weekend. We have the Dunk Low Industrial Blues. Ja is expected to release a new colorway in the light smoke gray. The Air Force One Low Bronx. And then a satin green women's dunk, which is quite insane. They look pretty insane to me. And then on Saturday, got two new Jordans, Jordan 4 Red Cements and the Jordan 12 Field Purples. And then you also have three new dunks, the Dunk Low Polar Blue, the Mystic Red, and then the Women's Cracked Orange. And then a possible another new colorway of the Jaws. Also, the Women's Cortez World Made. Pretty insane, luxurious feel to the Cortez. Definitely, if you can get your hands on those, I love them. So I would definitely recommend. There's been some sick colorways in the women's collection for Jordan. So moving on into our bigger topic of the day, and the one that I want to finish off with, just because I feel like with some of the vacations I've gone on, some of the stores I've gone on, it's something I've noticed, and I think a lot of consumers have noticed. Thrift shops and vintage shops. Thrifting, I feel like, became more and more popular in the late 2010s and into the 2020s for multiple reasons. One, you can get clothes for cheap. Two, as we move into, I know I kind of just got into debate about sustainability, like if we're actually practicing it or not. But the people who are, it's a great way to show sustainability. Clothes have already been worn. You know, what is one person's trash is another person's treasure kind of mindset. So I think that thrifting can be good for a lot of reasons. You can get clothes for cheap, that kind of thing. The one problem I see with it is you're kind of taking away. I mean, thrift shops in general are meant to be donated. Obviously, I mean, that's where they come from. But then I feel like, in terms of the whole idea of it, is that it was originally for people who couldn't necessarily afford retail price clothing. And so you're getting kind of someone's hand me downs for a cheaper price because you can afford that price rather than the expensive $20 to $30 t-shirt. It sucks because it's been shown that Goodwill, those other companies, and I mean there's multiple factors to this with like inflation and that kind of thing, but like their prices have gone up, and I do think a part of that is because more and more middle class consumers, I know I keep talking about the middle to upper class consumers continually shop at thrift shops, because it's become a trend, which again, it's cool. The sustainability, the idea of it. There's a lot of cool reasons. I guess it just sometimes it does feel a little disappointing because I feel like at times we're taking away a platform that allows them to shop freely at these stores. And I'm not like saying everyone does this. I'm just saying like there are definitely cases where I feel like you shouldn't. I don't know. I'm torn on it because I feel like a part of me says like you shouldn't be shopping at the thrift shops. Like it's meant for those in need. But then another part of me is like, they're doing it for a multitude of reasons. Like there isn't a specific target audience for a thrift shop. So I am torn on it, but it is something to think about. Especially, I think we often, oh, let's go thrifting, like whatever. Like it is cool and it's fun. Like I've done it, like I'm not saying like I'm not innocent of this, like, but I also think like you need to be conscious, like when you're doing that, you could be taking away clothes from somebody else who may need it more than you. And I'm not like trying to like guilt trip you or anything. I just think it's something that, we should think about. Second part of this is thrifting has then, I feel like, led into vintage clothing shops. So there's been a lot of controversy because vintage instead of thrift. So vintage are basically, how I look at it is vintage is all of your good finds at a thrift shop resold at a vintage shop. Vintage shops are actually quite expensive. And how it was explained to me, you go to a thrift shop, you can buy a shirt for $5 to $10. Well, they have to make profit. If you're going to make profit on a shirt, you're going to want to, a normal t-shirt's like, what, $25? Cost of that t-shirt's about $5. So you're making $20 profit. So you're at least upcharging it $20. So if you were to buy a t-shirt for $20, you upcharge it 20, now you're at 30. So then that's already expensive in your eyes because somebody else has worn it. But then you also add in the value factor of that. So if it's something really cool, something sought after, throw in another $10, $15 because people will pay for it. Again, is it business? Of course it's business. You have a high demand, of course you're going to upcharge. But again, do I think that it's necessarily right? Not necessarily. Do I think that clothing that's already been worn should be resold for $40 to $50? Not really. Obviously, they're not getting away with like shirts with holes in them or anything like that, but I don't know. It is a weird concept, especially because we have been so accepting of it. We're definitely feeding into it. vintage is, I think, to a certain extent, it's always going to be somewhat cool because I think we as humans, as much as we try to live in the present, try to live in the future, we always like that nostalgic feel, and that's what vintage clothing brings to us. So it is very special, and that's why people are willing to pay a higher price for vintage clothing. But at the same time, you're paying for something that's has already been worn, has already a lot of times lived its life. Not every time, you get your gems where they've only been worn once or twice, and that the only aging is just that they sat in the closet. But a lot of times the things that are being sold at these vintage shops are old, worn, sometimes have stains on them. I don't know. It's just, to me, it seems a little excessive. Granted, this is somebody who's probably pays for overpriced, everyday items, but I don't know. It's an interesting conversation and something I wanted to put in perspective because I think it's not being talked about enough. Vintage stores are expensive, and is it worth it? We continue to pay the prices and we continue to feed into it, but is it really worth it? And I think that's the question that we all have to ask ourselves and that kind of thing. But that's kind of all I had today. I hope you enjoyed my segments. I'm going to continue to try to become creative as we get into more of the football seasons and that kind of thing. Of course, I'm going to be analyzing weekly games. Of course, I'm going to bring you album reviews. Going to try and bring on more and more stars for fashion segment. Kind of bring in more stories. I think it's kind of where I can be more creative in. So thank you for listening if you've been listening this